Hello, and welcome to my very first video in my Saw series. Today we are discussing the first Saw film. Before diving in, I have to give a big shout out and thank you to Luke Headland. I recently discovered his Saw-related artwork and was completely blown away by the very professional quality of that work. This poster specifically is the one that he posted most recently that brought him and his art to my attention. At which point I became immediately interested in using some of his work in these videos, specifically the thumbnail images. So yeah, the image you see as this video's thumbnail and that you'll see in the thumbnail for the video on Saw 2 and Saw 3 and for my Saw 7 rewrite will be artwork that he has done and graciously allowed me to use. Now, Luke has a Redbubble account where you can actually purchase prints of his artwork. The address for that should be on the screen now, and a clickable link will be in the description below. So I encourage you guys to check that link out, and if there's anything that you think you would want to buy, please do that. And thank you again, Luke, for letting me use your art. It is without a doubt far more impressive than these videos themselves. If you're new to this channel and this is the first thing that you're seeing as far as my channel and what this series is meant to be, then I would like to offer a quick introduction. My name's Chris Youth, and I am a huge fan of the Saw series. I think when viewed as an episodic series instead of individual films, the Saw series has been pretty underrated overall. The first 6 films do tell what I see as a very fascinating and compelling overarching story. The 7th film, however, which was called Saw 3D when it was released in theaters, but then when it was released on home video, it's currently titled Saw the Final Chapter. It was an incredibly unsatisfying finale to this story. And because of that, I decided to rewrite Saw 7 and basically create the ending that I think would have been more fitting to this series, that would have paid off the incredible story that the first 6 installments spent so many years telling. And so it is my intention to release my Saw 7 rewrite in the first half of May, specifically before Spiral, the new Saw film, is released on May 14th. But leading up to me releasing that rewrite, I wanted to do a series of videos discussing each of the first 6 installments of the Saw series and basically go over a lot of the things that I feel more casual viewers don't always pick up on as far as what the overarching story is and why people like me found that so interesting. And in the process, basically go over what it is I personally wanted in the conclusion to this story, and what it is I feel that the fans were owed over what it is we actually got. Each of these videos will be broken down into segments. The first several will not require you to have seen past whichever film I'm talking about in that particular video. So in this one, for example, you can watch the bulk of this having only seen the first film. And then once I start talking about it in relation to the series as a whole, I will clearly indicate that people that haven't seen the rest of the series, or at least the first 6 entries, should stop watching. So the first section of each video will be kind of an abridged commentary, basically just me pointing out some of the little things in the film that I feel like sometimes go unnoticed, or at least when I first watched the films, like maybe I didn't catch on to right away. This first section is admittedly geared more towards people that are new to the series. I imagine a lot of what I'll be pointing out in that section are things that longtime Saw fans have known for a while. So if you're someone that's been a fan of the series for a long time and I'm not really contributing anything that's news to you, feel free to skip that section. The second section will be talking about the differences between the different versions of the films. So they each have like a theatrical version and a director's cut. And then some of them have like a third version where it's just like the unrated version. In most cases, I am very familiar with what all of the differences are, and I'll kind of go over those and the ones that I think are the most significant and worth noting. The third section will be a sort of informal review and analysis of the film on its own. And that will then transition into the last part of the video, which will be for people that have seen all of the first 6 entries. At which point the fourth section will also be a sort of review and analysis, but of the movie in the context of the series, basically going over its part in the overarching story. And then that will bring us to the fifth and final section, where I'll be talking about what loose ends there may still be from that particular entry that I had hoped to see resolved in Saw: The Final Chapter. And that will also serve as me kind of vaguely foreshadowing my version of Saw 7. I will time code all of those sections in the description below in case anybody wants to skip any certain thing. But okay, without further ado, let's get into Saw. So one thing that's kind of cool to think about here is the fact that John faces Adam, because as Lawrence's patient, if he were facing him, he would be like, hey, that's my patient. And then maybe start to piece things together.
What the fuck is this? Calm down, just calm down.
So one of the things I love about the Saw films is that with pretty much every single one, you watch it the first time, and then you get the reveals that come along the way. And then when you go back and rewatch it, it's almost an entirely different experience. I kind of love movies that do that and do it well. And yeah, this first Saw movie is a great example of that. When you rewatch it for the first time, you're kind of catching on to what it must be like for Adam to wake up in that room, you know, having no idea how he got there. Same as Lawrence, but the difference being that, like, once those lights come on and he sees who he's trapped in that room with, there's an element of awkwardness there that is unique to Adam's side of things.
What about you, huh? There's not much to tell. I was on my way home from work, and I don't remember anything else.
Lawrence's awkward lying is also fun to notice on the rewatch.
First dead body I've ever seen. Different in real life. They don't move.
So that line's always kind of struck me as odd. I don't know what movies or TV shows Adam's been watching, but I've never noticed a dead body moving in a movie or TV show. So the reveal at the end of the film where Jigsaw gets up off the floor and tells Adam that the key was in the bathtub, the fact that he tells him this and the way that he tells him this seems to indicate that it wasn't his plan for the key to go down the drain. Basically that he wasn't intending for Adam to kick up the plug and have the tub drain before he had a chance to realize the key was in there. And this moment where he uses the plug to retrieve the tape recorder, I suspect that this is when Jigsaw intended Adam to either notice the key or fail to notice the key and then lose it because he wasn't paying enough attention. But yeah, that obviously doesn't play out the way that he seems to have wanted it to.
There are ways to win this, hidden all around you.
The cough on the tape is a nice little touch, a little hint as to who Jigsaw is and what his motivations are.
Anything? No solids.
So when my brother and I were teenagers, I remember we joked around quite a bit about the toilet and what's inside it. And the joke we always made was that, like, when Jigsaw brings them in and chains them up and is setting everything up, that he then sits down on the toilet and takes care of business just so that Adam might have to dig through that. Obviously, we were just kids joking around. That said, every time I watch this movie, I can't help but wonder when and from whom did the contents of that toilet come from.
Patient had... His name is John.
Dr. Gordon. He's a very interesting person.
So for any of my subscribers that follow me for my Lost content that might be watching this video, I mentioned recently the similarities that Saw and Lost have. And if you were watching this for the first time, you may have been pleased to discover two Lost actors in Saw. They both appeared in this movie before they were in Lost. The first one is Ken Leung, who plays Detective Stephen Singh in this film. And the other is Michael Emerson, who plays Zep Hindle. And I'm sure there are other Lost fans like me out there that get a kick from seeing Michael Emerson appear and talk about an interesting bald man named John. But anyways, there's a cool little detail about this scene where, if you look carefully, John has a sketch of the reverse bear trap sitting on the little table in front of him. Kind of a big clue as to who the Jigsaw Killer is.
Oh, what a minute, Tootsie.
Some more great foreshadowing.
X marks the spot. X marks the spot. We need to search this room again.
So I remember showing this movie to my mom a few years after it came out. And when it got to this part, I remember her saying something that I've never heard anybody else say. And basically that was her guessing that the X in the room was the dead body because of how it's spread out like an X. And I remember when she said that, I just laughed out loud. And I think she thought I was laughing at her because I thought it was a dumb idea. But that obviously wasn't the case at all. I actually thought that that was a pretty good guess. I was laughing because in my head I was thinking about if Lawrence and Adam had come to interpret the body to be the X referenced in the tape, then it's fun to imagine them trying to mess with the body. And then in my head, I was imagining John's reaction on the floor, being like, fuck. It was funny to me.
Excuse me? Just because I'm stuck in this room with you doesn't mean I have to report to you every 10 seconds.
So I don't know how obvious this is or isn't to most people, but I have heard people ask, why did Adam hide the photo of Lawrence's wife and child at first? And my answer to that is Lawrence has been tasked with killing Adam in order to save his wife and child. So Adam has a good reason not to show Lawrence that photo and incentivize him to follow through with killing him. More recently, I've also come across people question how Jigsaw could possibly have predicted that Lawrence was going to find that photo. And I think those people are kind of missing the point. Jigsaw has hidden clues and, ways to get out of their situation everywhere in that room. He says so on the tape. So I don't think he knew Lawrence was going to find that photo. It was just one of the many possibilities of clues he could discover.
Oh, you little man. I see you. Does Dr. Gordon know you're at home this way? I know you know something. What are you doing there? Waiting for the doctor. I'm waiting for the doctor too.
So another thing that may or may not be obvious to most people, but I think I was kind of confused about when I was younger, is why was Tapp so obsessed with Lawrence, even though his alibi checked out? And that's because the fact that Lawrence's pen light showed up at a crime scene while he actually had an alibi indicates that whoever the Jigsaw Killer is somebody that knows Lawrence and like well enough to have been in his office. And that's why Tap and Sing are so frustrated by Lawrence's unwillingness to get involved. Like, he's too self-absorbed to want anything to do with their investigation, even though they know he's somehow connected to this killer, and if he put some effort into it, he might be able to help them figure out who it is. So yeah, Tap is obsessed with Lawrence because it's really the only lead he has. He knows Jigsaw is somehow connected to Lawrence and that he's already tried to frame him. So it makes sense for him to want to keep an eye on Lawrence 24/7 and wait for something suspicious to happen. So I think there's actually a lot of evidence here that Jigsaw intentionally led these detectives here. The idea that he recorded Amanda's tape during a fire alarm going off in the building that he was in seems a little suspicious. And then the fact that he arrived at just the right moment, but was, had a hood up so they couldn't really see his face. And then, yeah, the fact that he was completely prepared to handle them. The fact that he was wearing gloves and that he apparently left no identifiable trace of him in that building after he took off. We know that 5 months later he wasn't caught, even after that building was discovered with all of his stuff, and yet apparently he left nothing for them to figure out who he was. So yeah, all of that implies to me that he intentionally led them there.
What are you doing? Hey, what the hell are you doing?
Okay, so this next part is not a criticism of the writing or the storytelling. It's merely me criticizing the thinking of the characters within the story. There's absolutely no reason that Lawrence should be turning off the lights to whisper to Adam. That's obviously not going to do anything to the audio, and in fact, the only thing it is going to do is attract attention to the fact that you're trying to do something sneaky. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he then turns the lights back on and then immediately, with no pretext whatsoever, offers Adam a cigarette. And they perform that really bad charade. And I realized it wouldn't have mattered anyways if he hadn't bothered to turn on the light or if they had done a better job acting. Obviously, since Jigsaw was in the room with them, he was going to hear whatever plan was made, and he's the one shocking them to reveal any deception. I get all that, and I get that nothing they did would have worked. I just think that it's funny that in Lawrence's mind in that moment, he didn't realize how unbelievably obvious he was being.
Clearly, whoever paid you to take pictures of me is the one who put us here. Maybe. What do you mean maybe? Of course it is. What did he look like?
No, he's just a guy.
Was he tall? Was he skinny? Obese? What?
Don't take notes about his
You
appearance.
must remember something about him.
I can't.
You're telling me you don't remember a thing about the guy?
I told you, I don't...
Oh, for fuck's sake! I give up.
He's a tall black guy. He's got a scar around his neck, okay?
Okay, so another thing that I've heard people express confusion about, but again, I don't know, maybe most people, this is obvious, but that is, why is Adam so reluctant to describe Tap to Lawrence? And I think that simply comes down to Adam wanting to protect his client. This guy has hired him and been paying him decent money to follow Lawrence and take these incriminating photos of him. And under normal circumstances, it would absolutely make sense to not reveal who put him up to this to the man that he's been following and taking photos of. So yeah, it's just him wanting to protect his client. So I get that Tap has had a breakdown of sorts, but I always laugh at his behavior during this shootout.
I have a family too. I don't see that that's my mistake. It's a mistake I like to fix.
You have to die.
No, I want to live! I want to live!
Sorry.
I want to live!
My family.
Now, this is something I think plenty of people before me have pointed out, but what Lawrence does here, it's heavily suggested that he intentionally shot Adam in the shoulder, and that this was basically a much more convincing version of the ruse that they tried to pull off earlier. And then we get to it, the classic reveal. I think the studios kind of thought that it was the gore element of this film, which honestly, there's not that much of in this movie. What there is just implied more than anything. But I think the studios thought that was why this movie was so successful. And I'm not saying there weren't people that were attracted to it for that reason. I know there are plenty of gore fans out there. But I think the reason it was so successful was much more about this ending than it was about the violence. But to the credit of the people that continued making these films, they did go out of their way to have similarly mind-blowing twists at the end of each installment. Some with better success than others, but I'd argue each film was successful at this to a certain extent. Okay, and then one last thing to address in this section. Every once in a while, I've seen people express confusion about Adam picking up the gun. They say, oh, there was only the one bullet, and Lawrence used that to shoot him in the shoulder. With this one, more than anything, I think this is probably obvious to most people, particularly those that have seen the movie more than once. But it's not the gun Lawrence used that Adam picks up. It's the gun that Zep brought in with him. So from John's perspective, there was still a very real chance that it was loaded. Okay, so as I expressed before, I think the director's cuts of each of the first 6 films are definitely the superior versions. That said, in some cases, the differences aren't that extreme. And that's pretty much the case with this first one. The main thing that the director's cut adds to this film is an extra shot of Amanda digging the key out of the insides of the man she was locked up with. And then I think the song choice is different for when Adam goes back to his apartment. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I saw the theatrical version, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And then what I would argue is the biggest difference isn't something that the director's cut added, it's something that they trimmed down. And that's the final conversation between Lawrence and Adam before Lawrence leaves the bathroom. In the theatrical version, Lawrence mentions that he needs to get help because if he doesn't, he's going to bleed out. In the director's cut, that line is cut. Also in this scene, in the theatrical cut, Lawrence stops near the door because Adam's calling out to him. And Adam asks, are we going to be okay? And Lawrence kind of, looks at him and says, I wouldn't lie to you.
We're gonna be okay. I wouldn't lie to you.
This section of the scene is also cut out in the director's cut. And I do agree with their decision to go back and take that out. On paper, I actually kind of like the idea of that line because they've spent the whole movie lying to each other. So in that moment where it seems like they've prevailed and Adam's asking if they're going to be all right, for Lawrence to say that he wouldn't lie to him, it's just kind of a clever way to suggest they're not going to be all right. I guess the reason that I prefer it cut out in the director's cut, and this is the same reason that I kind of prefer them to cut out the part about him bleeding out, is that it leaves us, the audience, with that feeling of triumph a little longer before the big reveal. In the theatrical version, Lawrence mentions that he might bleed out, and we've just seen the long journey it takes to get down to this bathroom. And we know the likelihood of him finding anybody before he bleeds out is slim. So in the theatrical cut, when he says that, you know, in our minds, we're like, ooh, yeah, he's probably not going to make it. And then to have Adam ask that line and Lawrence, you know, kind of ominously say, I wouldn't lie to you, we're already getting the sense at that point that this isn't going to be a happy ending. Whereas in the director's cut, when you cut out those couple of moments, you know, Adam's just killed who we think is the villain. And yeah, Lawrence is like, okay, I got to leave. I got to go get help. And yeah, Adam doesn't want to be left behind, but ultimately, yeah, he lets him go and he starts looking for the key. And through that whole thing, we get to still hold on for a little while longer to the idea that, hey, they did it. And yeah, it just makes the reveal that much more impactful, in my opinion. So yeah, that's the difference between the director's cut and the theatrical cut. Oh, and then the extended version, which is what HBO Max has on there. If you go down from the theatrical version, you can select the extended version. I mentioned before that that's a weird combination of the director's cut and theatrical cut. And that's because it has what was added to the director's cut. And that's like the extra shot of Amanda digging through the insides. But it doesn't cut out what the director's cut cut out. Which honestly is the one difference that I thought was actually worthwhile. And on that note, let's get into my review and analysis. Like I said at the beginning, this is going to be pretty informal. I'm not going to get too in-depth on these. But yeah, I mean, it was the movie that started the whole Saw phenomenon. And it's easy to see why. They had very little budget. They filmed this very quickly. A lot of the actors they only had access to for, you know, a few days. And yet, despite all that, they managed to make a really intriguing, interesting, engaging movie. And because they actually had all these hurdles to overcome to make a movie as good as what they made, I always feel weird expressing criticism of it. But yeah, some of the acting in this isn't amazing. Some of the jokes fall flat. A lot of them don't. And a lot of them, kind of their awkward delivery kind of adds to the impact of the humor. And then on a plot logic level, there are certain things that within the context of just this film don't make a lot of sense. And some of those things later are sort of explained through the sequels. But I think it's very important to remember that when this movie was made, they had no way of knowing that it would be as successful as it was going to be. So they had no plans to do a sequel. It was written and made as a standalone thing. To give an example of one thing that I mean, is just kind of the idea of poisoning somebody and trusting him to adequately carry out certain aspects of your plan. It seems pretty risky, especially when you could just do certain things yourself instead of laying on the floor the entire time. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love that twist and that reveal and how it recontextualizes the movie. But in the world of the movie, it is kind of funny to think that this guy just wanted to lay there in the room the whole time, probably cold and uncomfortable with that makeup and everything, and just, yeah, laying on that hard, dirty floor, just to give a dramatic reveal at the end. In universe, without knowing more about this guy as a character, it does seem a little silly. Also, this last part isn't so much a criticism against the movie itself. A lot of people that haven't watched the entire series or followed the overarching story that it was telling refer to the Saw films as, oh, that first one was really good and then the sequels were all crap. And I actually don't find that to be a fair assessment, nor do I find it particularly accurate. Some of the things that are heavily criticized about the later films, the acting, for example, were still a problem in this first one. But more importantly, the story that the series began to tell as the entries went on is far more exciting and interesting to me than what the more simple straightforward story of just this first film was. Again, that's not a knock against this film. It's one movie. It's got to tell a contained story, and it does a good job of that. But what I love about the series is the story that it became, which isn't the same thing as what just this one film's about. The same way that like a pilot of a TV show will be about one thing, and then obviously you expect the series to continue with certain themes and characters and arcs and all that, but it often evolves into something that is overall different from what just that pilot was. Anyways, while I certainly wouldn't rank this as one of the worst Saw films, it is probably the one out of the first 6, mind you, that I least look forward to rewatching whenever I rewatch these films. And again, that isn't really this film's fault. It's partly because I've seen it so many times that I could probably recite most of the lines to you. And then, yeah, largely because what the story evolves into is far more fascinating to me than just the plot of this film. Which brings us to the last couple sections of this video, which will be geared more towards people that have seen the first 6 films. So if you haven't seen those, probably just stop watching here, and then once you have watched the other films, if you feel like coming back and checking out the remainder of this video, please do. Okay, so there's not a whole lot to say about this one in these last 2 sections, because again, this movie was made as a standalone film. They had no idea it was going to be successful, and yeah, it was just them trying to get this movie made. It was a standalone, contained story. And because of that, there really isn't anything in this that was intentionally setting up future storylines. Now, what I can say about this movie and its role in the series as a whole is that it obviously set the tone and overall feel of these films. Once you reach the final act of this movie, things get so intense and suspenseful, and it's just, this cross-cutting of all these things happening at once and everything coming together in this really climactic confrontation. And that's something that all of the sequels seems to really try and replicate. And again, I think for the most part, they succeeded. And as I mentioned before, the same goes for the big reveals or twists at the end of each film. So yeah, basically it established what became the defining traits of this series. Now, because this film was its own thing and then it kind of turned into a series, the characterization of Jigsaw in particular doesn't quite match up between this film and the later films. By which I mean the Jigsaw of this film doesn't seem to mind killing at all. Based on this story alone, it seems that he put Zepp up to killing a mother and child. He wanted Lawrence to kill Adam. He had Amanda kill a dude that he apparently injected with an opiate overdose. And then, of course, it seems he was about to kill Jeff. But as the series goes on, Jigsaw becomes a character that insists he is very much against killing, and that every one of his test subjects has a way to survive, and he wants them to survive. So what I feel Saw 7, as the conclusion to this series, owed us in relation to this film was kind of reconciling those differences, because it doesn't have to be a plot hole. It actually would make sense that what Jigsaw was actually testing was Lawrence's reluctance to kill, and the same with Zepp. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about in this section is the fact that when John leaves Adam in the bathroom at the very end, a lot of people look at that as him killing Adam in a way. But the fact is, Adam actually has a number of ways to still escape that room. One of which we see just a couple movies later at the beginning of Saw 3. Adam is right there by the toilet lid. He could do the same thing that we later see Eric Matthews do. Granted, he doesn't have the light, but he could still feel around, grab that, kind of feel where his ankle's at, and do the same thing. Another option is the shard of the two-way mirror that he had with him. He could use that to slice through, around the ankle, and then slide his foot out of the cuff. And the last option is my favorite because it is by far the easiest and least horrible, is that he could use Zepp's gun to shoot the chain and just walk out of there. I know once he's electrocuted, the gun kind of goes, off to Adam's left, but he still could have retrieved it. It probably would have taken a long time, but he has enough stuff around him. The way that he did with the bath plug, he could do that. He's got Zepp's jacket. He's got Zepp's clothes in general. He's got all these things where he could, toss those around and try and drag the gun back to him. And then, he could shoot the chain. And a cool little observation about the gun, as far as whether or not it still had any bullets, is that type of gun holds 8 bullets at a time. And we see Zepp reload it before he leaves the apartment.
Diana!
Then, once he gets down in the tunnels and Tapp is chasing him, he fires 4 shots. The 5th shot kills Tapp. So by the time he gets to the bathroom, he's used 5 of the 8 shots. And then, he's about to shoot Lawrence, and Adam grabs him, pulls him to the floor, and 2 more shots get fired into the ceiling. And basically that means there's 1 bullet left in that gun. And instead of using it on the chain, Adam's first gut reaction is to try and use it to kill John. But all right, I think that's all I've got for this first one. Like I said, those last 2 sections, I think will normally have a little bit more in them once we get into the more serialized narrative of the later films. 2 might be similar because that one also, when they made it, was largely designed to stand on its own. There obviously was a little bit of sequel bait at the end, but it doesn't intentionally set up future storylines in any significant way. But I'm intending to release these between every 1 to 3 days, just depending on how quickly I can get them edited and uploaded. So if you didn't absolutely hate this, I do hope you'll come back for Saw 2 in the next couple days. Until then,
Game over.
Hello there. If you'd like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive, just click the circle to subscribe. In the meantime, you can click either of the 2 boxes to check out other content from this channel. Or don't. The choice